And I think part of it is because the industry, is booming and is so competitive now, and it's hard to attract and retain therapists. It's hard to get therapists to put in the 20 to 25 hours a week that you want them to, and everybody wants their own deal. So I've seen practice owners bending over backwards with perks and benefits, and I think sometimes they're almost held hostage, or they aren't strong enough to realize, okay, I got to put my business hat on and realize what this is costing.
Hello, Lane.
Hi, Sarah.
Welcome.
How are you doing today?
I wish the sun was shining. I think that would help a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. We're recording in March right now, and we had a fool's spring scenario that was, quite tantalizing. And now we're back to chilliness.
Yeah. And this is your first Chicago spring, huh?
It is, but I am from Michigan, so
I know. It is different though. It's a little different somehow.
It is. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, there will be many false springs, unfortunately, in your future.
Ugh, shoot.
So hopefully by the time people are listening to this, it's actual spring and it's nice outside and the sun is shining and birds are tweeting and who knows what else.
Beautiful. I can't wait.
Yeah. So, little bit of an announcement. Well, it's kind of a big announcement before we get into the details for this episode. So, Group Practice Revolution, the podcast is going to continue because it's super duper important to be talking about evolving group practice. However, the platform that I have been offering, we're going to put it on pause. We're going to put it on pause because that is expensive shit. And I realized I'm getting honest with myself about my workload. And one of the things I recognized is I continue to do this. I am the only person I can blame for this. I continue to create and create and create and create. And my problem is that I can do all of the things that I create, but I don't always build in time to market it and sell it and do all of the other things that are involved in it. And I just realized that piece of it was such a heavy lift. And if I had the money to hire somebody to do all that right now, I totally would. But I don't, because I'm still building Head Heart Business Therapy. And so I've decided to put the platform itself on pause. But I still am really passionate about educating employees about working in group practice, making sure they are not being taken advantage of, and any of the other things that I've already been doing, trying to educate people around all things group practice. So I will continue doing the work. It's just not going to be one place where everybody comes to me. You're going to kind of have to invite me into your space, which also I found out my human design says that. It's like, not what is it? It's basically that like there has to be some sort of opening for me to walk into. And I think that's part of why it wasn't working, because that's not the way the energy flows for me. So we're going to see. I still have the platform. We're going to put authentic leaders on there. And so we'll see what happens with it. But that's where GPR is right now.
Yes, it's a see you later and not a goodbye.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I'm excited for what the future has in store for you and Head Heart Business Therapy.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
But speaking of being excited, you said particularly you really liked this episode. Tell me what you were digging.
Yeah, I will. I feel like most times when I listen to Group Practice Revolution episodes, I just feel so grateful that I'm being exposed to this information before I'm experiencing it,
Yes.
Yeah, and this was another realm, you know. Lori is a lawyer, and I feel like I never really thought about the legal ramifications or, the juncture between the mental health field and law. And obviously, there's a lot to know and a lot to learn. So, yeah, it was really interesting hearing from Lori, who does work closely with therapists.
Yeah, both practice owners and employees, which I think is
Hmm.
cool that she's got that perspective of both. And the other thing that I think was interesting is not just talking about what's happening in group practice on that like local level, but also thinking about how the national legal situations are sort of trickling in to individual employer spaces. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, I did too. And just the fact that there can be, things going on the federal level that maybe
Hmm.
you wouldn't be privy to if it weren't from, hearing from a lawyer. Mm.
Exactly, because I'm not trying.
Yeah.
I mean, you could listen to Strict Scrutiny, but I don't listen to that podcast. But you could go listen to that if you want to be informed
Hmm.
about all the legal stuff.
Hmm.
Shout out to Crooked Media. Anyway, let me introduce you. Oh, and actually, one more thing I wanted to say before I introduce you to Lori. So, Lori and Cindy Cherwinski, who is another group practice consultant, and I think Cindy is really good at the operations stuff. So, if that is like your primary thing that you need, Cindy's a really good person for that. They have I think it's monthly or maybe semi monthly networking events that they're hosting for free in person, and I got to present at the last one where I was sort of talking about the future of group practice and how we weather the storm. And a lot of it was, figuring out how to be relational in the space of not knowing with therapists and all of the private equity and VC changes that are happening in the field. So shout out to them. You can go to Lori's website or check out Cindy. We'll make sure to put links in the show notes. So Lori Goldstein is an employment lawyer who's represented employers and employees since 1984. She advises clients on employment matters including discrimination, harassment, retaliation, wage, and overtime issues, employment agreements, and independent contractor classification. Lori handles claims before the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and Department of Labor. She also conducts workplace trainings and investigations and regularly presents on employment law. So please enjoy this convo with Lori Goldstein. Hello, Lori. Welcome to Group Practice Revolution.
Thank you, Sarah. I am so happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you. So, do you want to tell folks? I know like therapists don't always realize that lawyers and therapists have a similarity of we have a very particular niche and specialty, right? Do you want to share with listeners what your specialty is in the legal profession?
Sure, I would be happy to. So I'm what's known as an employment lawyer, and generally employment lawyers either represent one side or the other, meaning they either represent the employer, the management side, or they represent the employee and individual side. And there's all kinds of different chat groups and law firms that represent one or the other and boutiques. And so I've represented the employer side for 40 plus years, my whole career, working first with a couple of mid-sized law firms downtown that said, that's all we do is represent employers,
Hmm.
and some executives who could pay those hourly rates.
Mm.
I went on my own in 2011 and opened my own practice and started to represent employees as well. So I get to do that, and I love to do that. And what that means from the employer side, a lot of it is compliance, making sure the companies are consistent with regulations, that their policies are updated, and that they're not only in writing, but they're actually enforcing them consistently, keeping them up to date with all of the crazy changes and regulations.
Hmm.
And helping them if an employee needs a accommodation for a disability, for example, or wants a leave of absence for some reason, or they have complaints about a manager, or there's some disciplinary issues, or possibly conduct issues, and maybe even a termination discussion. So I handle those kinds of things and severance agreements and employment contracts, non competes. And for individuals, it's basically the same things on the individual side. I help
Hmm.
them through new employment agreements, severance agreements, issues they might have, discrimination complaints they might have, or harassment. They often call to find out what their rights are, which is a great thing to do.
Yep.
Even if you're not sure, then ask a lawyer, because sometimes you'll be surprised, pleasantly surprised, you have rights. Other times, at least you'll know that you have asked the question and done your due diligence, and take a deep breath and say, there isn't anything I can do about it. I better look for another job, things like that. So I'd like to basically help companies and individuals have peaceful resolutions to their problems, get closure, just have peace. So in that way, we are alike. I have a lot of therapy, in me. I don't know why, but a lot of times I'm letting people, have their day in court and they need to vent. And I always tell them if they need a therapist, I will refer you.
Yeah.
But I'm empathetic and I want to hear their story. And there are times I have to say it's totally unfair what's being done or what was done, but it's
Yeah.
not illegal. And you might just move on, move forward. Or sometimes we can get them some resolution, some settlement, something realistic that works for both sides.
Yeah. And I love that you said that you can just call a lawyer and find out what your rights are, because I think sometimes employees forget that they have rights. But especially, I mean, I'm saying especially Illinois, but I don't know. I feel like Illinois is especially protective of employees. That's true.
That is true. Illinois is very protective. A lot of the bigger states, the blue states and big cities like New York, California, of course, is very employee protective. Chicago too has more protections than even Cook County outside of Chicago or the rest of
Oh,
Illinois.
really? Oh, how
So,
interesting.
so it's hard for employers to be employers in Chicago, but employees get the benefits. So.
Yeah. Well, then let's talk about, now that you're saying that, I just want to kind of like go through history with some folks. So I started my practice end of 2013, beginning of 2014. First people I brought on as 1099 contractors, because that's what group practices were doing at the time. And then there were a rash of IRS audits across the country. And then everyone was like, oh shit, we need to, we need to flip to W-2s. And I remember having the conversations with my staff at the time that, like, if you stay, you will need to be a W-2. And I remember them saying, like, well, I'm going to lose my freedom. And I didn't know enough back then to say, actually, you have more protection now. And so it's just interesting how the quote unquote trends change around that.
Definitely. And before you started your practice, so I started mine in 2011, and I had a couple of connections that were mental health therapists. So I started working with them, and right away I noticed that why is everybody it works for you a 1099? And they would try to explain, and the biggest explanation was, this is how everybody does it.
Is
This
that
is how
everybody does?
everyone's been doing it. That's
Yep.
what my colleagues do. And so some of them would say, thank you for your advice, but I'm going to keep doing it this way.
Yeah.
And others would say, yeah, I probably should change to W-2s. And some of them can stay 1099s. You kind of have to do an audit, which
Right.
I recently did for a mental health practice. Some of them can stay 1099s, but they have to fit a test. And otherwise,
Yep.
it's better to be preventive and follow the laws and treat them as W-2s if they need to be, because misclassification liability can be really expensive.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of the questions I was thinking of as you started talking is like the different ways that therapists and lawyers are wired. And what's coming up for me now is one of my frustrations as a consultant has been sharing, just like you did, like sharing the truth, sharing the honest feedback, sharing, what is best practice, and having practice owners go, no, thank you. I'm going to do it my way. Do you find that that's across the board with therapists? Why do we do that?
No, I mean, well, what I've said is so since 2011, when I started my practice, and now we're talking almost 15 years later, you are right. And what's not just IRS audits, I think just the word got around. They're part of industry associations, and maybe even the licensing board are telling them, you better be careful, or they see that companies or their colleagues have gotten in trouble and penalties, and one employee or person who's been misclassified can go back 2 or 3 years, and it can be expensive. And even if it's not a mental health practice, when I've come across a client that I know is not following a law, I will basically cover myself and write
Mhm.
them the memo and say, this is what you need to do, and then tell them, here's what happens if you get sued. And what I've also said is, even if you're a family business and, everyone's been there for 20 years and nobody would sue us, we're all friends. All it takes is one person to file for unemployment. It doesn't have to be adverse. They got let go, they file for unemployment, and unemployment starts asking questions. Then they come in and audit, then they call the IRS. And so you have to bite the bullet. Even when companies say, well, if I start treating them as W 2s, they're going to ask, how come now? Why didn't we do it before? And don't you owe me? And
Mhm.
um, sometimes that happens. A lot of times you can do it more cleanly if it's the end of the year, or you're rolling out a new employee handbook, or you're doing some kind of changes. And then you do this along with it. Sometimes nobody cares. They're just happy. They're not all happy to become W 2s. You're right. Some
Mhm.
want the flexibility and to be independent, but um, you know, it's the company should not violate the law for that reason.
Right, right. Well, and speaking of the changes that have happened, I'm really curious what you have seen change and or stay the same over the years, right? Since you've been doing this in private practice since 2011 and even further back before then at some of the law firms, the dynamics between employees employers. Like what are you seeing right now that might be different than it was?
Yeah, well, that's a loaded question because right now, even compared to a year ago, is so different,
Yeah.
which I'll get to. I mean, I would say that, over the past maybe 15 years, even before that, um, things that have stayed the same have been that, well, until this year, that employers were really good about wanting to do right by their employees for the most part. There's always some that aren't, and wanted to follow the laws, but also wanted to make sure, that they weren't doing more than they had to,
Yep.
because sometimes you can't afford to do more than the law requires
Yeah.
or even what the law
Even
requires.
what the law requires, honestly. Yeah,
Right.
it's true. Mhm.
So, they had to make sure, to do what they could. And wanting to understand discrimination and harassment laws, wanting to be updated on the new protected categories, which have, increased in Illinois. And I probably, Chicago and Cook County too, but our sexual harassment laws have all come into play during those years because Me Too started. I mean, I do sexual harassment training, so that
Mhm.
speech is, starting with Harvey Weinstein. That was like 2016. And so there's been a lot of
Yeah.
awareness of sexual harassment, other types of harassment, and that's been great. Educating, organizations and individuals and people getting training and realizing that what might have been okay to say or do, 10 or 15 or 50 years ago is not okay now. And just because Joe is 75 and this is, he always pinches girls' butts since he's been 15, it's not okay. So
Sorry,
those
Joe.
rules have to change. Yeah, you can't protect them. We also saw same sex marriage come in, which was wonderful and is still here, and more transgender rights, even federally. Sexual orientation and gender identity are protected categories under federal law, except that we have, as of this year, this executive order from the president that says we only have two genders, male and female. And it's not consistent with Title VII. They haven't changed Title VII, the
Interesting.
discrimination law. Illinois, Cook County, Chicago all protect it. And so it's kind of, been an imbalance. I mean, I'm still advising clients based on these laws, and they should still be behaving. But we heard from the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is the federal agency that
So
enforces Title VII. Um, they have new marching orders. They're supposed to focus on claims that have the word white in them. And if it's a, or, these, basically the non minorities, the ones that feel that they have been reverse discrimination, which really isn't reverse, it is discrimination. And
wow.
if they're transgender or LGBTQ claims, they're sending them to DC to kind of sit there instead of having them reviewed locally. Yeah, it's kind of, really alarming. So,
Oh my wait, so let me make sure I understand this. So essentially, like, let's say a transgender employee wants to make a claim against their employer. Instead of the city of Chicago or the state of Illinois dealing with that, it's sent to DC to just, like, languish.
well, they can file it. There's so many human rights ordinances. We have a Chicago one, a Cook County one, an Illinois Human Rights Act, and then there's Title VII, which is federal. The state and local ones, you can still file those, but
Okay.
anything that's being filed with the federal EEOC, which most claims are filed with them if they're 15 or more employees. Otherwise, you have to file locally. Those are the ones that are getting sent to DC. So otherwise,
Wow.
we have a Chicago district EEOC office. They're all over the country, but they aren't taking those cases anymore. And they're also supposed to focus on religious accommodations. So, that has changed just with the new administration. It's been very interesting. So, you know, we
Wow.
kind of wait and see. And now the EEOC, they've been off work for the last 50 something
Mhm.
days.
Mhm.
So yeah, we'll see what
Wow.
happens once they get into the courts. And then we have judges that, are all over the board as we see.
Right, literally.
So
Wow. Hmm.
that to me, I mean, since I've been a young lawyer or even before that, when we learned about the three branches and checks and balances, but we don't see them anymore both generally and in the employment world.
Wow, that's fascinating because sometimes about, like, how my life personally doesn't feel very impacted by what's going on in Washington necessarily, other than the, like, anger and outrage, right, with
Right.
that, but this is a really important detail for both practice owners and employees to understand how what's happening in Washington is actually impacting our local businesses.
Right, right. And so,
Wow.
you just wait and see how the city handles it or, the state. I mean, as far as I know, and I know the chief administrative law judge at the Illinois Human Rights Department, and, you know, I can't imagine that they would do anything other than continue to passionately enforce our laws, which are
Yeah,
employee protective.
right.
And they're there for a reason.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Well, and in the like that feels like a good like macro picture of what's been happening legally. I'm curious if you're seeing anything changing in the dynamic between employers and employees. Like what I feel like I have seen is employees having more frustration with practice owners desiring a certain level of transparency that before people were just kind of okay, like, going with business as usual, and so I'm curious if you're seeing more lawsuits or more complaints or anything like that.
I would say, and I've heard this I represent a lot of mental health practices, and I've heard that um, the younger generation, the incoming, those in their 20s or maybe 30s, have a different work ethic or expectations. And I mean, it's not just mental health. It's
Yeah,
it's that
everywhere.
generation. I think there's different expectations. I think work-life balance. I think I applaud them because there hasn't been good enough work-life balance for many, and there still really isn't for many. But I think that's the right way to go. That's the right way. You don't necessarily have to work from home full time, but
Right.
there should be flexibility and people understand life happens. And, employers need to understand that. I think there needs to be good communication. And I think, up until recently, again, I think, there's a lot of divisiveness in our country.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people just feeling like it's okay not to be nice and it's okay to fight. And I hear from my family law colleagues that the divorces now are just so, even when they used to be amicable and the couple would realize, let's not spend all our money on the lawyers, let's just go in and get it done. They
Right.
don't. They are just, everyone's fighting, and it means the lawyers are busier. I think that's happening in workplaces too. Not all of them, but I think it's harder. And there's also, even between employees themselves, different political standpoints, different perspectives. Everybody comes from a different place anyway, different age, generations. And so it makes it hard. I've seen, though, a lot of practice owners work really hard and intentionally try to make it a team. And let's bring everybody in and let's have these, weekly meetings so people can vent and provide
Mhm.
suggestions and feel like they're being heard. So I love that. And if they're not doing that, then I try to encourage them to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it feels like because there's so much fear right now, when we're experiencing fear, we tend to get more self-interested and be less patient and less compassionate with the person that's right in front of us. And so if we can create spaces where, like you said, we can vent and we can like share our struggles and remember that like we together are not the enemy. Like that's where I feel like sometimes I worry that practice owners are being put in the same box as Jeff Bezos, right? Like, we are not swimming in our coins like Scrooge McDuck. I was talking to somebody earlier today about, like, one of the things employees sometimes forget is that you can't just spend all of the money that comes into the business. You have to keep it in the business.
Right.
And even though, yes, technically it belongs to the owner, like, the owner's not spending it. It's literally sitting there in case 5 staff leave at
Right.
one
Right.
point
You
in
need a
time, and
reserve. It's a
yeah, you need a
business. Right.
reserve, so yeah, yeah. I also wonder, and I'm not sure if you handle this exactly, but I feel like I've seen a lot more board complaints happening for reasons that probably people wouldn't have filed board complaints before, like to IDFPR, like instead of
Oh,
going
okay.
directly to the person,
Interesting.
just filing complaints at IDFPR. I have a friend who had a former employee file a complaint against their license, and it was
Interesting.
frivolous and it was thrown out. But it's the culture of I can just leave you a 1-star review on Google.
Right, right, right. No, I haven't seen that. I mean, I have a colleague who does a lot of IDP, FPR consultation and handles those claims. And no, I mean, I guess I should be thankful that none of my clients that I've known have been threatened or have been the subject of those complaints. But I think, at the same time, I think that part of the problem that I see is that mental health practice owners, for the most part, are also therapists. I mean, I think, I don't think there are any that aren't therapists. And that's pretty much what you started as and what you're really good at.
Yeah.
And what I see is, in terms of the dynamics between the employers and the employees, is you have to take off your therapist hat when you're a practice owner, and you have to be running the business. Not only, and doesn't mean you have to know how to do everything.
Yep.
Get an HR person, get a
Right.
bookkeeper, have an employment lawyer and a business lawyer that you can call once in a while. Um, but it also means that when you're, making rules and decisions and having communications, you're not, while you're empathetic, you're not treating your employee as if they're, a patient. And there have been situations where an employee has come in asking for accommodations for a mental health disability. And the practice owner kept telling me, I don't think the doctor's giving her the right advice. I think she should be getting this kind of treatment. And I said, wait a minute,
Oh.
you can't be her therapist. You should never be, no employer should be deciding what an employee should do with their health. So,
Mm-mm.
but that's hard. It's hard to take off that hat.
Mhm. I
So,
also see what I tend to work with a lot of practice owners on is struggling to hold people accountable. It's like there's like 2 modes for therapists. Either they're super rigid and really structured and there's no space in between, or they just have a really hard time holding anybody accountable for anything and they're just super softies. Are you
right.
seeing that as well?
Well, I am. And I think part of it is because the industry, is booming and is so competitive now. And it's hard to attract and retain therapists. It's hard to get therapists to put in the 20 to 25 hours a week that you want them to. And
Mhm.
everybody wants their own deal. So I've seen practice owners bending over backwards with perks and benefits and giving them much more than the mandated paid leave. And I mean, some of it is great. But I think sometimes they're almost held hostage, or they aren't, strong enough to realize, okay, I got to put my business hat on and realize what this is costing.
Right.
financially and
Right.
credibility wise. And, then employees, it's not a good relationship then.
Yeah. I worry about that a lot too. And I can tell when on the Facebook groups when somebody's saying like, oh, we're hiring. And I always go look and I'm like, okay, what kind of practice is this? There's so many more private equity places that are popping up now. And what are your thoughts about how independently owned practices are going to be able to compete with those private equity places that they really probably can afford to offer more benefits because they've got a bigger umbrella?
Right. They have the economy of scale. And
Yeah.
yeah, I've seen it happen not as much with mental health practices late, but with healthcare generally.
Yeah.
Um, Veterinary practices now, urgent care. And
Mhm.
I mean, my experience with private equity owned companies is that they don't care that much about being compliant, at least with employment laws.
They
They're
don't?
churning, they're going in and, doing what they can, and they're just, setting it up to sell. And part of the mergers and acquisitions, they seem to forget if you don't have a compliant, if you're not compliant with the laws besides employment, but
Right.
including employment, then whoever's buying this company may be buying a hornet's nest of lawsuits and all these generous policies and non-competes or things that aren't valid. And
Right.
so get your house in order before you sell it. Or and but it seems like the private equity companies don't care about that. They buy it as is
Wow.
and maybe sell it as is. And my experience with at least one of those companies, I've had one employee after another call me because they're not getting their breaks that are required by law. And each and every time I'm getting a check from the company after I write a couple letters, what do you want? Don't sue us. We'll pay them. And I think, well,
Just do
okay,
it
now
right
they're
the
going to
first
change
time.
what they're doing. They don't change. Some of that my clients are
Wow.
still working there. They still aren't giving breaks. And what I learned is, because I'm naive, I can't believe someone would do this.
Right.
They make more money just fighting off those claims. They make more money with being able to schedule, and this is why there's no breaks. They schedule back to back
Right.
patients,
Right.
all day long. They make so much money with that. They don't care that people aren't getting breaks. And if someone notices, they pay them off. It blows my mind. I don't understand how a company can act that
Well,
way.
it's exploitation. It is so
Right.
it's that's what it is, and
It
they
is.
don't care about.
And some of the providers are okay with it because the money's great. They don't care that much. I mean, but some of them do care. It isn't healthy. It's not safe for the patients, for the employees. I mean, there's
Nope.
more than just you're not following break laws. There's license laws and ethical issues, and yeah.
Right.
So,
Right.
and they just
Wow.
write checks and keep doing it.
That's fascinating. Well, and you brought up non-competes, and this is something that has come up recently. So I know that now in Illinois, non-competes are a no-go, which we've been talking about, I think, for the past couple years. No,
Nope.
they are
No,
still
they are
enforceable.
still enforceable. So last year there was a federal Department of Labor rule that would have made them unenforceable across the country. Non-compete, just non-competes.
Right.
That rule did not go forward. It died. So
Interesting.
now it's up to each state, and our state allows non-competes. They have to follow a lot of requirements, but if you follow the requirements, then they're enforceable.
That's
So,
interesting. They might be enforceable, but that doesn't mean they're ethical, let's just say, is how
oh,
I look at it, right? So, because this is the other thing that I think sometimes, and I am guilty of this too, we'll say something is quote unquote illegal, and it might not be illegal, but it's not best practice or it's not ethical or it's just like bad vibes, honestly. Like, I think
yes.
non-competes are the like worst vibe. And the interesting thing that I've seen pop up that I wonder your thoughts on this, because so as a former practice owner, I understand the sunk cost of hiring somebody that might not be the right fit and then them leaving and taking all of their clients with them. I understand that. And I know practice owners want to prevent that. I would say prevent that in hiring. You got to be better at hiring. You got to
Yeah.
be better at onboarding. You got to be better at retaining talent. But what I'm seeing some practices do instead of having the non-competes, because it's just shitty to tell people they can't take their clients, is they will say they will try to enforce some sort of like administrative fee of, if you stay with the practice less than 2 years, then you have to pay me $5,000. And again, might be legal, but that's bad vibes. It's just, again, it's like it's putting the pressure on the employee who honestly doesn't know what they're getting into. I think the power resides with the employer, who knows exactly what they should know exactly what they're doing when they're hiring. And if you don't, that's why you got to hire somebody like me or you to help with that, right?
Right. Oh, you gotta get the right people into the right seats, right? And then, but you don't always know, and things happen, so you don't always know how it's going to end. I think, non-competes and non-solicits have their place in certain industries with certain people. Whenever I hear of somebody in the mental health industries, and it's rare that a practice owner even wants to enforce or have a non-compete. Most of them say there are so many clients to go around now. I would, be happy if if some of my people left and formed their own practice, and of course their clients are going to go with them. It's not
Right.
going to really impact you. So that's one hand. Secondly, patients have the ultimate right to choose their healthcare provider. So
Right.
there's only so much you can do.
Right.
You can't have a 15-mile non-compete, because that would effectively mean a client, is not going to drive 16 miles away. So
Right.
it would have to be short in time and geography. Um, and even to have a non-solicit, you can't solicit away the clients, but the clients have the right to come with. Ethically, don't you have to tell the clients, here's where they're going or here's where they went? You can't. But I've had a few practice owners I've
Yep.
defended individuals who are on the end of a cease and desist letter, or we're going to
Yeah.
sue you because you're not supposed to do this and this was in our contract. And I'll say, are you kidding? It's not realistic. It's not ethical. And
Right.
we usually, they go away.
Yeah, what would you tell an employee if they are faced with somebody who's trying to enforce, one of the things that I've actually had friends that were subject to the practice owner asking them to pay them out essentially for their clients. What would you advise an employee to do in that situation?
Well, I would want to see what contract they have, because it depends on, is there a contract and what's in there, and is it valid and is it enforceable?
Mm.
I would say always, if you have one of those agreements, don't just assume that it is enforceable or that it's not enforceable. Get legal advice,
Right.
because you don't always know what it means. Also, when you're going to work at a new place, even if your contract doesn't require it, if it has restrictions in there, I recommend that that person tell the prospective employer, I have this contract, I have these restrictions, because they may not want to hire you. Um,
Mm.
and so but also get legal advice, because if your lawyer tells you, yes, you have this document, it's no good, then your lawyer can tell your prospective employer that, and I can tell the prospective employer's lawyer, take a look at this, it doesn't work. So there are ways to work around it. Just don't just assume. Get advice, because it's expensive to defend that litigation, even if
Right.
you win, and the company's not going to pay for you. They're not going to
Right.
pay. I mean, your new employer usually won't pay for it. But there is Illinois law now that if an employer sues to enforce a post-employment non-compete or non-solicit of uh, customers, patients, clients, or employees, and the company loses, they have to pay the attorney's fees for the individual.
Mm.
So it's a big deterrent.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Well, to wrap up here, I'm curious if you have any wishes for practice owners or employees. Like, what do you really want to see in the future for group practice?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, I'd like to see them be successful. I'd like to see there be more communication and collaboration, and understanding that, recognizing that you're really on the same team. Yes, this is
Yes.
your boss and these are the people that pay you, but we are here for a reason. And especially in your industry, we are here to, help our clients. And so it's not good for your own, your own vibes and your own health to be arguing at work, with other employees, or, with management. And so there needs to be a way to just try to break through, whatever shell there is, and, realize we're all people. We're human beings. Life happens. Have some flexibility, understand work-life balance, and follow the laws.
Yep. And yeah, the relational piece is exactly what I'm hoping to help with at Group Practice Revolution. So, yep.
That's great. I applaud you because it's necessary. And, without it, that practices fall apart. They lose people.
Yeah.
They implode.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
Absolutely. Well, Lori, well, where do people find you?
They can find me on my website, which is www.lorigoldsteinlaw.com, or my email is lori.a.goldstein@gmail.com. Otherwise, phone number 847-624-6640.
Great. Amazing. So don't be cheap, therapists. Hire Lori. Ask the questions before you
Thank you.
pay more. So thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it and hope folks will gobble up all your wisdom that you shared with us today.
My pleasure. Happy to do it. And I do provide a free little mini audit. So if anybody
Oh,
is interested
great.
in that, I will send them my questionnaire and you can fill it out. And I will let you know if, there are issues to take care of.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it.